A warm and friendly hello, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got yet another conference preview for you today as we have got the Summit League Conference Preview Edition, one of my favorites as you get a lot of fun three-point shooting, you get a lot of high-scoring games, not necessarily a ton of defense, but it is always a blast, and it's always a blast whenever this man joins me, Rob Donaldson. He does great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. He's going to be joining me in segment number 2. We're going to be taking a look at all 9 teams in the conference. We're going to be taking a look at the coaching changes that we've seen in the offseason, the transfers are going to be coming in, and so much more. In segment number 1, I'm going to be diving in on the betting trends and the styles of play that we get out here in this fine conference, and then we'll wrap things up in segment number 3 with my projector finish for the Summit League. As per usual, with these conference previews, I always want them to be standalone, so anything that I might have missed in terms of news and notes in college basketball on Thursday, I'm going to polish those up on the podcast tomorrow. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated, and then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And while I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds whenever and wherever they want. With EdgeBoost, 100% of gambling transactions do get approved, and when you go to edgeboost.bet, put in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That's going to get you a $1 for $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. Now, let's take a look at a conference that always has a really explosive three-point shooting, as they were home to the number 1 three-point shooting team in all of college basketball last season, North Dakota State. And they were even better at shooting on the road rather than at home. Overall, North Dakota State shot 39.8% for three-point range. That went all the way up to 41.9% in a road/neutral court environment. So just absolutely amazing there. The newest comer in St. Thomas, who they are now eligible for the NCAA tournament this year thanks to the NCAA ruling, which they should have been all along. That was stupid that was an NCAA rule to start with, but you know what? We've got them eligible, and that's all that matters. They were 12th in the country in terms of their own three-point shooting last year. They shot 38.3% from three-point range. After that, there's obviously quite a bit of a drop-off, but still, you've got a lot of rock-solid teams that were able to do a nice job of being able to give you some nice three-point shooting. Oral Roberts is always a team that's pretty rock-solid on offense, so I will say the Russ Springman era of 2 years, that wasn't necessarily so great as they dipped all the way down to being 145th in the country in terms of their three-point shooting percentage last year. South Dakota State, this was actually a down year for them. They were 122nd in the country, but still were able to be a rock-solid team on the glass, with Oscar Clough being one of the top rebounders in all of college basketball. As we know, Eric Henderson now out of the fold, so a little bit of a coaching regime change there, but they were still a relatively rock-solid team with that regard. And South Dakota was one of your best over teams in all of college basketball. We'll hit upon them in a minute, but they were just 288th in the country with their three-point shooting percentage, shooting 31.6%, and it feels like this team is wanting to zag while everyone else is zigging, as UMKC, the old Kangaroos, they were a team that very much was different than most other teams with regards to the conference. As for Kansas City, they were 212th in the country with their three-point shooting percentage, a team that plays very, very slowly, while you've got a lot of other teams that they like to play very quickly. And then for Omaha, they were able to have a really nice breakout year last year as they were able to make the NCAA tournament, and it was a historic year for them, 75th in the country with a three-point shooting percentage at 35.6%, and just lots of general offensive efficiency with regards to this conference. You don't have a lot of teams that generate turnovers whatsoever, so this means that you're going to get good, clean possessions for so many of these different teams. For Omaha, in terms of their nice year, 67th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Now, North Dakota State, they were number 5 in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. In terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, left something to be desired. North Dakota, they were one of your, shall we say, middling teams in the conference last year. They were 112th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Oral Roberts just didn't go well with Russell Springman there, 236th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. And South Dakota, despite the fact that they shot it poorly from 3, they were 63rd in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. South Dakota State, you always know that they're going to be rock solid on offense. They were 47th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. And now let's get to the fact that you have and nobody in this conference generating turnovers whatsoever. I've talked quite a bit about North Dakota, and they weren't dead last in the country in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, but they were 363rd out of 364 teams. South Dakota State was 359th in the country, so this is very much a make it or take it sort of league, as you had also one of the worst teams in terms of generating turnovers in all of college basketball last year, being Omaha at 322nd, so they weren't necessarily a team that was pumping up the tempo. North Dakota 313th in the country in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, so a lot of teams that they just weren't prioritizing this sort of thing. Even for Kansas City, UMKC, a team that is looking to be a little bit different than everyone else, they're not a team that's necessarily going to put a whole bunch of pressure on you either under Marvin Menzies, who always interesting with his coaching tenure over at UNLV, 193rd in the country in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. And with regards to the actual tempo in this conference, you did have quite a few teams that played either super duper slow or super duper fast. South Dakota was gunning it. Number 3 in the country in terms of total possessions per game. A lot of good, clean family fun with regards to their games, and it's always a lot of fun to be taking a look at. And for North Dakota State, because they do prioritize their three-point shooting so much, they actually play a little bit more slowly in order to be able to set up those shots. They were 242nd in the country last year with regards to total possessions per game. Oral Roberts under Russell Springman was playing quite a bit slower, 189th in the country in terms of their total possessions per game. Again, UMKC, one of those teams that is really looking to slow things down, 322nd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. South Dakota State was playing a little bit more slowly in recent years under Eric Henderson, 116th in the country in terms of total possessions per game a season ago, so an intriguing team there. And for Omaha, it is a team that was a little bit more mid-tempo last season, 162nd in the country in terms of total possessions per game, so you have a lot of fun there. And then for Denver, the Pioneers, 148th in terms of total possessions per game, and they're a team that really struggled on the defensive side of things as well, so there's that aspect. And you had a lot of teams, by the way, I should throw this in, you're not really grabbing a lot of offensive rebounds as well. This is not a conference that you were able to get a lot of second and third chances if you missed your first shot, because so many of these teams, they prioritize three-point shooting. So St. Thomas, 355th in the country in terms of percentage of their missed shots that resulted in an offensive rebound. Oral Roberts, 352nd in the country in terms of percentage of their missed shots that resulted in an offensive rebound. Surely you had a little bit more success with some of these other teams as well, but it's not like you had a whole bunch of teams batten down the hatches. Denver was 307th in the country in terms of percentage of their missed shots that resulted in an offensive rebound. So a lot of these teams, they just weren't able to really grab a lot of second and third chances, which really did make things a little bit more warped with that regard as well. So that's why I say it's very much a make it or take it sort of league out there, and it makes things very interesting with regards to both and against the spread standard and with regards to totals. How about if we take a look at the totals first, because I laid out the various tempos that you have in this conference and the various amounts of three-point shooting that you get as well. Out there in the Summit League, this should come as a shock to not too many people. More overs than unders in this conference, as UMKC was your demonstrative under team. 21 unders to 8 overs. That, as a matter of fact, was one of the best under rates in all of college basketball. Here are the teams that had a better under rate than UMKC last year. Waiting, and nobody. They were your top under team in all of college basketball. Dead second last. Nobody else played more unders than them, with West Virginia 9 overs, 22 unders at a push being the next best under team in all of college basketball. But you'd only have 2 other teams play more unders than overs. Denver, 16 unders to 14 overs. South Dakota State, 13 overs to 17 unders. And then South Dakota was one of your best over teams in all of college basketball to be able to atone for that. 73.3% of their games went over the total. Only Lemoyne and Temple, go Owls, they had a better over rate than South Dakota last season, as they were able to just really start to gun it. 22 overs to 8 unders. That was a team that was able to cash quite a bit there. And then you had quite a few other teams that were above the 60 percentile to the over. North Dakota and St. Thomas, 18 overs and 12 unders, with St. Thomas having a push in there. North Dakota State, 19 overs and 10 unders. And then Omaha, 18 overs, 15 unders, and then an even Steven, 13 and 13 to the over for Oral Roberts. And then if you take a look at what these teams were able to do against the spread, it's a pretty spread out conference now, because you've got schools out there in the great state of Minnesota, you've got the Dakotas, which, in terms of the amount of states that you're separated by, it's not too much, but you have to travel through the mountains. And I once made a road trip from Wisconsin on over to Portland, Oregon, so I had to drive through the Dakotas, Montana, and everything like that. And I can tell you, it's a little bit of rough travel out there, to say the least. But And this was a conference that you had one very, very profitable team in Omaha, 13-10 against the spread. Oral Roberts was just dismal, 19-17 against the spread. And then a lot of middle. You had North Dakota State, UMKC, and South Dakota State all go either 14-15 or 14-16 against the spread. And then St. Thomas, 17-14 against the spread. Denver, 17-13 against the spread. South Dakota, 17-12-1 against the spread. And an even Steven, 15-15 for North Dakota. But you take a look at what these teams were able to do in their road trips. It was a conference where you didn't have a lot of profitability on the road. For Omaha, they were amazing, 12-4 against the spread on the road. Denver was 7-5 against the spread on the road. North Dakota State 9-5, but then South Dakota State 3-9 against the spread on the road. Oral Roberts 4-11 against the spread on the road. You had 7-8 for both St. Thomas and South Dakota, and then UMKC 6-8 against the spread on the road. With North Dakota being that even team, they went 7-7 against the spread in their road games. And what I find to be very intriguing about this conference as well, the way that the underdogs were able to cash. Only two teams were below 50% in terms of covering their games as an underdog. St. Thomas was actually one of them, 3-5 against the spread as an underdog. Oral Roberts 8-16 against the spread as an underdog. Just a bad year for them, but Omaha was 15-7 against the spread as a dog. North Dakota State 6-3 against the spread as a dog. North Dakota 13-9 against the spread as a dog. South Dakota State 4-3. South Dakota 9-7 against the spread as a dog, and then Denver 14-12 as a underdog. UMKC an even Steven 8-8. And these teams, when it came to non-conference play, they were able to provide you a little bit of bang for your buck. All but three teams were able to be profitable against the spread in non-conference games. South Dakota State at 6-7 against the spread in non-conference play. That was obviously a little bit rough. UMKC 5-6 against the spread, and then Oral Roberts 3-6. But North Dakota State 9-3 against the spread in non-conference play. Or Omaha 9-5 against the spread. South Dakota State 7-4-1, and then you had 7-5 for both St. Thomas and North Dakota, and then Denver 7-6. So those are the betting trends and the styles of play that we've got out there in the Summit League. And coming up next, how about if we look at all these rosters, all the coaching changes, and so much more with Rob Donaldson, who does great work with the show/podcast Rob's Best Bets. Next, right here on Cuz Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the Beats and Family Podcast, the Summit League Conference Preview Edition. Lovely Las Vegas for Cuz Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. This is the Summit League Conference Preview Edition, and we've got one of our good friends aboard, as Rob Donaldson does a great job with the show/podcast Rob's Best Bets. When it comes to prime college basketball season, he's one of the best in the business, currently doing an amazing job of holding it down on the baseball front, as he's much like myself. When one season ends, another begins for him. He does an amazing job getting set for this upcoming season. He does amazing work taking a look at all 364 teams, and you're able to follow him on the old Twitter /X at RobDFB, and additionally on his YouTube feed, youtube.com/Rob Donaldson. And Rob, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Greg. And my goodness, man, every single one of these we are getting so close to actually seeing game action. And the Summit League year over year continues to be one of those, I guess the way to say it is, slept on type of leagues that actually end up performing or really showing themselves in the non-con performances as well. And I'm excited to dive out into all the teams here today.
Absolutely. And I do think that it's such a fun conference to be taking a look at, because you have a lot of teams that they really love to bomb it from three-point range and they love to be super up-tempo. But how about if we take a look at, first things first, a team that is sort of the opposite of that. UMKC under Marvin Menzies has been trying to zag while everyone else zigs. They play at a very slow, very controlled tempo, which I find to be very intriguing, because everyone else is trying to go bombs away from three-point range and everything like that. And with UMKC, it is a team that's going to be built once again around Jason Petty, who's rock solid at the guard spot. When this team has really been rocking, they've been having some good low post play. They only have like one guy on the roster that's above 6'6", and I do fear that might be a little bit of a long year for UMKC, with not necessarily having those big men that they need, in my opinion, to be able to play their style.
Yeah, and unfortunately, UMKC over the past, 3 years, the Marvin Menzies era, they have been one of those teams that's brought in a lot of transfer portal talent, but at the same time, they're one of the teams that gets picked apart. That's why they're adding it even to begin with. And when you are looking at the makeup of their roster this year, I do kind of worry if they're almost kind of plateauing in terms of this era, this style, until maybe they have that one transfer portal class. We just kind of saw, North Dakota go from the real basement to kind of where UMKC has actually been sitting over recent years, but kind of have that next level elevation. if UMKC can get the right guys in the building through the portal, and I'm kind of out on them this year at the moment, I do feel like it could be a really nice spot to bet on them game by game with those plus money dogs, but I'm not crazy about them in terms of their actual hierarchy within the conference.
Yep, certainly. It is going to be interesting to see how they fare moving forward. And you did mention North Dakota, a squad where they had Trayson Eaglesaf, who was just so good for them. And they lose him in the offseason. And frankly, they lose 5 out of their top 6 scorers. Eli King is really the lone of their main guys that returns from season ago. They're going to be relying upon someone like a Reggie Thomas to be able to take big steps up. They didn't add too much via the transfer portal. They added Josh Jones from Oral Roberts, but he didn't do a ton for them. And with North Dakota, I feel like this might be a little bit of a rough year for them.
Yeah, North Dakota is kind of interesting because it's almost like, how do we set the expectations with them, right? Because I remember previously to Paul Sather, they were really, really bad. Like maybe couldn't even, field a proper roster kind of bad. And at least during his era, I think he came in around COVID time, that 1 year of kind of leading into the shutdown where we didn't have a March Madness. And from that season on, they've actually fielded some competitive rosters within the Summit League and also just rosters that could actually win games. That was sort of a main hurdle for North Dakota leading up to that point. So it's almost like, yeah, North Dakota is probably going to go through it, but relative to the past North Dakota teams prior to Paul Sather, they're actually in a pretty good spot. And I do kind of feel like they're going to continue hovering around this middle of being good enough to win games, just not enough games to really be relevant on a national scale or even at the high end of this league.
Yep, I do agree with you there. And then the other North Dakota school, North Dakota State, they just bombed it from 3 last year. They were number 1 in all of college basketball with shooting 39.8% from 3, which went up to 41.9% away from home. Problem is they have to replace each of the last 4 scorers there. Now, Damari Wheeler-Thomas, out of sight, out of mind, missed all of last year. He was a starter 2 years ago. He's back. Noah Fredersen is 6'10". He offers a little bit of versatility, but feels like this team might be trying to go a little bit different this year. They'll still probably prioritize a lot of three-point shooting, but someone like a Markai Strickland, who only shot 25% from 3 over at Western Michigan, he's one of their main ads. Emil Skita comes on over from Sacramento State, not necessarily a three-point shooter, and I feel like this might be a little bit of a changeover from what we saw last season with the Bison.
I do think their approach is going to have to be different just based on the personnel. But, what I'll tell you is if there's any coach in this league right now that you had to say, hey, back this guy to sort of win you a game in conference, I'm going to take Dave Richman. Dave Richman's one of my favorite just mid-major, low-major type of coaches. And year over year, it's been successful at a school that hadn't really experienced a ton of success prior to him. And obviously, this is, again, kind of the storyline with a lot of coaches in this spot, but he had the absolute best roster of his coaching career, and they actually made the NCAA tournament when it got canceled. And from there, he never really has kind of reached that mountaintop again with winning the Summit League. And now when you are looking at the hierarchy of the Summit League, I do feel like there's enough roster turnover on those top teams, coaching turnover in some of the teams that have been competitive in this conference for some time, that I do feel like if the pieces can mesh early on, North Dakota State could be one of the teams that actually win this league or win this conference. And I really do want to back Dave Richman out from the gate.
Yep, and Dave Richman, he has a clear track record of winning. I know that he's made it very clear that because it is a one-bid league, he tries out some stuff in non-conference play because he wants to see him fire on all cylinders when it comes to actual conference play, as our good friend Rob Donaldson. He does great work with the show/podcast Rob's Best Bets. He is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And how about if we take a look at the other Dakotas, starting with South Dakota, a team that they just absolutely gunned it last year. How about number 3 in the country in terms of total possessions per game? A really good offense, a really bad defense, but they get Mr. Bruns back. The Bruns burner and Isaac Bruns, who was able to register 14.5 points per game. And they've got back their 7-footer Cameron Fentz, who missed the second half of the season due to injury. You're bringing someone like a Jordan Crawford from Eastern Kentucky. That's an up-tempo team. That should be able to fit relatively well. And for South Dakota, I do think that they're going to need to improve their defense, but very intriguing that they weren't necessarily a great three-point shooting team last year, but they just put up points because they did a nice job getting to the cup, and they committed the fewest turnovers of any team in all of college basketball last year on a per-possession basis.
In South Dakota, we have talked about all summer long, Greg, the power of that third year, that building block year, and guess what? Eric Peterson, absolutely took advantage of it in terms of not formulating his best roster in year three. Went from 12 and 19 to 12 and 20 to 19 and 14, 9 and 7 in conference. And you brought up a player that I thought was kind of the key reason as to why they didn't just win this whole darn league. And that was Fens, because when he went out, it kind of felt like they lost that post presence. When you're talking about this type of league, usually you're only going to have one dominant big man, and that was their makeup last year. It was Cameron Fens down low. He could also stretch the floor from three when he needed to. It was the perfect blend for this type of league and this type of roster. And when he went out, it kind of felt like the team died. And now going into this year, yes, they have lost a couple of the guards that I really did like, Chase Forte in particular, who went to Boston College, but I do kind of want to buy into that building block year under Eric Peterson, and then him just kind of using that as a propeller to move forward. And for that reason, I think South Dakota is going to be right there to stay. And if a good year kind of turns out here, don't be surprised if Eric Peterson's on the move, kind of like Eric Henderson from South Dakota State. I think the trajectory could be very, very similar.
Yep, and the Erics are very much taking over the conference, which you do love to see. As you mentioned with South Dakota State, them losing Eric Henderson, he heads to Drake. And how about this? Peterson takes over. Brian Peterson. He spent 6 years as an assistant over there at the program, and they retained 3 of their top 5 scorers from a season ago. Joe Saylor's back, Matthew Moore's is back, Kalen Gary as well, and then some of those ancillary pieces like Jane Jackson and company. They really didn't go hog wild in the transfer portal or anything like that, but I'm very impressed by the way that Peterson was able to keep all the guys in-house, and I don't think that there's going to be too much of a change in terms of South Dakota State's playing style with them hiring from within and retaining so much of the roster from a season ago.
And obviously the big one is Oscar Clough going to Purdue, but it's one of those things where South Dakota State seemingly is always competitive, and that's why they're hiring in-house for their head coaching replacement. You know, it's not like this was a needs-based or a desperate hire. No, they want to keep the same kind of tradition rolling. And again, Brian Peterson's a guy who's from the Midwest, from this kind of area of the country, who's always had the ability to go out on the recruiting trail and get these guys. He's actually one of the big reasons why Oscar Clough even came to South Dakota State to begin with. And from that standpoint, I feel like we have to kind of buy into them early, being that same sort of caliber type team, and just let them prove us otherwise with their performance on the court, because they still have talent. They still have that same sort of coaching tree and element at play with this roster. And I feel like if you're betting against South Dakota State, it's probably not going to be a wise bet more often than not in conference.
Yeah, this team has been so good in the Summit League, and it goes back a very long time, even before Eric Henderson as well. You've got that great track record of success, and this is a program that has always had a track record of success in this conference, but it just did not go well in the Russell Springman era. 19 and 42 in 2 years, they let him go, and now Corey Bennett is taking over the program. He doesn't retain too much, though. Carlos Rosario, man, that if I'm not mistaken, began his career over at Washington State. He's back down low. They bring in Ty Harper, who was able to average about 10.5 points per game over at Youngstown State, and Chase Martin from Wofford, who he was out of the fold for Wofford last year, but 2 years ago did a bit of something, but it feels like an Oral Roberts team that it's going to take them a year or two to develop under Corey Barnett. He brought in some relatively solid pieces, a lot of guys that were at like the power conference level but didn't see a lot of playing time, but I do feel like this is a team that in this conference are going to have a little bit of a tough changeover, and I think that might take a year or two for them to really be able to find their groove.
Oral Roberts is unfortunately one of those programs that when you are the Summit League and you have that kind of turnover of, hey, we had this magical run with a really great head coach in Paul Mills, let's see if we can build on it. Some teams do. You know, some programs like a Winthrop, for example, go from Greg Marshall to Pat Kelsey to, you know, insert another great head coach in the mix there too. And that's just becomes the MO of the program. Other ones like Oral Roberts only have that sort of blip in their history, and then it's going to be some rebuilding years, then some coaching turnover to hopefully get back a semblance of that great run. And I do feel like when you are looking at Corey Barnett, if you're looking for that upside in that element, he's coached under a lot of really good head coaches in Division I. Last year it was DeVries. Obviously there's Musselman in there as well when he was at Nevada. There are a lot of coaches that I do believe that could really end up being a good influence on this program stylistically. It's just a matter of actually seeing it. And from that standpoint, I'm not going to be buying in early, but hey, I'm willing to be proven wrong. This is one of the ones with an unestablished track record that is a true wait and see. And sometimes that's better than knowing what you already have isn't good enough.
Yep, and I do love the way that this program is looking to be able to build things up as well. I think that's going to be a down year for Denver, but bringing in Tim Breakstetter, hopefully I said that correct, after he went 75-22 at Minnesota State Moorhead over the last 3 seasons, the non-Division One level, the Division Two ranks, I think is solid. He has a clear style of bombing it from three, as his team last year shot 37.7% from three. He brings in a lot of those top guys from that stop. Carson Johnson for that team over at Moorhead was able to give the team 19.8 points per game on 42% three-point shooting. Logan Kinsey, he was able to notch about 14.5 points per game. So I think that there's upside here. It's going to take a little bit of time for these guys, but they've got a little bit of familiarity with St. Thomas because they're out there in the great state of Minnesota. And I do think that with Denver, there is a little bit of upside here. And I really thought that they got it right with this coaching hire.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of guys like a Ben McCollum, Josh Schertz have really opened the door to Division Two, right? Because what we hadn't seen, you know, I think if you go back 10 years and you're looking at the new head coaching hires during the 2014-2015 type of offseason, I don't know if you're going to see as many Division Two guys getting that crack at it. And now, because of the seal being broken by really good head coaches coming up from Division Two who had success at that level and are getting their chance now at the Division One level, we're starting to see that opportunity open up. And some of these programs that do hire from that level, I think are going to hit some really solid gold, because not everybody is going to be a great head coach just because they coach under Coach K, or, you know, one of these more established head coaches, a John Calipari, a disciple, or a Scott Drew disciple. But that's where everybody goes for. That's where they want. They want that crazy good coaching tree inherently. But what about a guy who's a proven winner at a college basketball level that doesn't truly differ a whole lot at the top of their league comparatively to maybe the Summit League? And from that standpoint, I don't, again, this is kind of a wait and see with Oral Roberts in Denver, but I do believe in giving them a shot to kind of see how they play through the first month, 2 months of the season, and all of a sudden, they might be one of the better value bets in all the sports.
Yep, absolutely. And I do think that Denver has a lot of upside. I absolutely love these teams that go to the non-Division One ranks, as many of them have been rewarded, to your point, in recent years. As our good friend Rob Donaldson of the Rob's Best Bet Show joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops for the Summit League Conference Preview Edition. And then St. Thomas was so good in the conference last year. Unfortunately, they fall short and they're unable to make the NCAA tournament / win their conference, because they weren't able to make the NCAA tournament last year due to these just absolutely stupid restrictions that the NCAA has. Fortunately, they are going to be able to make the NCAA tournament this year if they feel like it, and they've got a hero, Austin Hero, the brother of Tyler Hero, comes on over from South Carolina. Really didn't do a lot at South Carolina, but I know you love that. They bring back Noah Minsale, who was able to give the team double figures. Carter Pajurki, he's going to be back as well. I always have a tough time saying that last name, but they bring back a lot of these pieces from season ago. Recognize that there's going to be a few moving parts, but St. Thomas, they have formed themselves as a team that's really able to bomb from three. Little bit of help needed on the defensive side of things, but John Tower knows how to coach. This team was so dominant at the Division III ranks, and very few teams are able to make a transition going from D3 to D1 successfully. This program has, and I think that they're once again going to be chasing towards the top of the conference.
Yeah, and you know, we just talked about Division Two head coaches coming up to Division One, getting that crack, finding success, opening up the seal. Well, hey, maybe John Tower was the poster boy for the Summit League picture of, hey, if you can come from D3, be a national champion at that level, and immediately in year two win 19 games, then 20 games, then 24 games, and get second place in the conference, maybe there's a formula here, right? And I think that John Tower is one of those guys that maybe ends up, you know, being a lifer at St. Thomas. Maybe he doesn't. Who really knows? He's kind of in that range of maybe this is his last stop. Maybe he wants to venture elsewhere. But I do know that he's a fantastic coach. And I do know that now that there's more stakes on the table, more opportunity for them to actually clinch a spot in the NCAA tournament, I think that they're going to have one of their best years of him at the helm in terms of the D1 level, and they were pretty darn good last year there too. So yeah, sign me up on the St. Thomas train, along with Dave Richmond, along with South Dakota State just as a program back. I think those are probably my three favorite teams in this conference right now.
And then we need to hit upon the team that actually made the NCAA tournament last year in this conference. That would be Omaha, and they returned 5 out of last season's top 7 scorers. Now, the absolute top guys are going to be out, but you bring back Tony Osborne, who had 12 points per contest. Lance Waddles actually began the season as a point guard. He played a little bit more off the ball towards the back half of the season, but 6'8" Cameron Thomas, he's got good versatility. He's able to bomb it from 3. Now for Omaha, they really struggled outside the conference before going on this big run. That does have me a little bit concerned, but I think that this is a fascinating team that it feels like under Coach Crutchfield, they really were able to find their footing towards the end of the season.
And Greg, we're going to harp on this because we've been spot on all off season, but year 3 head coaches, 9 wins, 15 wins, up to 22 wins in year 3 for Crutchfield. And I believe in those types of progressions because, one, it shows me that the coach is actually developing year over year, which is the most important thing. And also, when you're talking about Omaha coming out of the absolute woodwork, you're not kidding, because Omaha hadn't really ever been relevant as a basketball program in quite some time. And all of a sudden, now they're making the NCAA tournament. And they're actually, I believe, leading at the half against St. John's as a 15 seed. Like, what a really great year for Omaha. What a really great moment to sort of encapsulate the end of the year, even though they came up short. And when you're talking about year 4, this is going to be the first kind of almost like paying for it tax of success, right? You had all this talent that you accumulated, that you built from the ground up. It gets picked by the bigger schools. Can you immediately regroup and retain that success? That is kind of what gives me a little bit of pause and what we're going to have to see kind of come to fruition. But I do know that they're going to be a competitive roster because they have one of the best head coaches in this league, and they still have a number of guys coming back here.
Yep, they absolutely do, and it is going to be a fun year out there in the Summit League, and I know that, Rob, you're doing an absolutely tremendous job getting everything set for the upcoming college basketball season, doing your research and looking at all these teams, much like I am, so let the good people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people are able to follow along on social media and other platforms.
Well, hey, Greg, it's been a blast talking about all these different conferences, all these different teams, the transfer portal, and I'm so excited for the actual games to be back in our lives here, coming soon, really soon. But for those who want to follow my bets leading up to then, or even my bets once the season starts, be sure to follow me on Twitter/X at RobDFB, and also on my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Rob Donaldson. But as always, Greg, I appreciate having me on, man.
Absolutely. Rob is doing an amazing job taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Every single time he joins me, he lends amazing insights and did so once again today. So big thanks to Rob for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. This is the Summit League Conference Preview Edition. So coming in next, I do give you my projector finish for the Summit League. Good lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It's always great to be able to get Rob Donaldson aboard. He does such great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. This time of year also does a great job on the baseball front, and as you can tell, because he's joined me for multiple conference previews, does a great job breaking down all these teams, big, small, and medium, and it was great to be able to get him aboard today. A big thanks to Rob for joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and now it is that time of the podcast. I give you my projector finish for the Summit League once again because I am doing a conference preview today. Anything that I missed in terms of news and notes on the podcast from Thursday, I will polish them up most likely in 48 hours because I do plan on doing my SWAC conference preview. If all goes right, that'll be up tomorrow. That might be up over the weekend as well. That might be more like 48 to 72 hours, but be on the lookout there. So I plan on doing the Summit League and the SWAC here in the next 48, 72 hours. So that is going to be on the radar, but what is on the radar for myself is taking a look at this projected or finish, and at dead last, I do have to go with North Dakota. Man, when you lose a guy like a Trace and Eagle staff, that is very brutal for this team, and I mean, for North Dakota, they've been a little bit more respectable over the last few seasons, but they just have a lot to replace. Eli King is the only of their top 6 scorers that is back from seasons ago after they were 355th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and King is able to do a bit of everything. Began his career over at Iowa State, 8.5 points, 5.5 boards, a little bit over a steal per contest, and then Zach Kraft, he was very crafty, shooting 40% from 3, and King did shoot 37.5% from 3. You should be able to have some guys that can bomb it from 3. This team was a top 115 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but now you need Reggie Thomas, George Nashvili, who, I mean, those two guys average like 2.5 points per game to really take steps up. They brought in Josh Jones from Oral Roberts at 6'10". He averaged about 4.5 points per game, but wasn't really too much of a rebounder. I think this team might not be able to give you a ton down low. The backcourt leaves a lot to be desired. I think that's a rough year for North Dakota here, so I do have them at number 9 in terms of my projector or finish. Number 8, I do go with Oral Roberts. I do like the hiring of Corey Barnett. He did a solid job over at West Virginia as a part of that DeVries coaching staff, so he goes back a little bit of a ways, going back to the Drake days, which, ironically enough, South Dakota State, they lose their coach to Drake, but that said, you don't have a lot returning from last year's team. Carlos Rosario was able to average about 4 points per game off the bench at 6'8", began his career at Washington State. I think that he's an upside guy, and I like Ty Harper coming on over from Youngstown State, mid-30s 3-point shooter, 10 points, 3 boards per contest. He'll help out the backcourt. Chase Martin, he missed last season, but 2 years ago over at Wofford was about a 4-point per game scorer, but you're really gambling on guys that are sort of down transfers. Connor Dow was someone that began his career over at Oklahoma State, but could never really get out there on the floor. Offrey Neve did not play last year over at West Virginia, 6'6" combo player that 2 years ago he had like 2.5 points, 2.5 rebounds per game. Luke Gray is back after he averaged like 3.5 points, 2.5 rebounds per game, but I just don't know what this team's identity is going to be. They really don't have a lot of three-point shooting in a conference that really prioritizes three-point shooting. I think that Barnett might try to zag while everyone else zigs, but it might be a year or two for them to be able to really find that footing. So Oral Roberts, I do have at number 8 in terms of my projector or finish. And number 7, I do go with UMKC. With UMKC, they lose so much of what has made them successful in this conference over the last few years. UMKC has been able to really spook teams because of the fact that they do play so slowly. In a conference where you've got a lot of teams that they play up tempo, they bomb it from 3-point range. This is a team that they really don't prioritize shooting it from 3 so much. Now, they do bring back Jason Petty. He was able to give the team 11 points, 4.5 rebounds per game. Guy that shot less than 26% from 3-point range last season, but guy that was able to give you some relatively nice production there. But that is really the main guy that returns, and you just don't have that size down low. You've only got one guy with Division I experience that's above 6'6", so I do think that that's going to be a little bit of an issue for this team. Heck, you saw it with UMKC last year. They were 4-12 because they were bereft of a little bit of size even last year as well. So they're really going to need their 6'9" big man in Adrian Scott to be able to step up for Scott. He began his career over at Auburn, just could never really get out there on the floor from, but relatively highly touted guy, so they're going to be looking for a bit of upside there. And then you've got Carmelo Branch, along Trey Booker. These two guys are right around about 6'5", 6'6". They're going to be giving this team a bit of versatility and some size along the wing, but for Booker comes in from the non-Division I ranks after he was relatively rock solid there, but they're really gambling on a lot of guys that they don't have Division I experience. Like I said, with not having as much size as in past years, I think that that's going to be a big giant issue with them, though they do have Kashim Grady back as well. He saw some good minutes for the CMKC squad last season. I do think that he's going to be able to provide this team with a little bit more stability in the backcourt after he dealt with a few injuries last season, was able to average about 5 points per contest. So with UMKC, I have them at number 7 in terms of my projector finish. And number 6, I'm actually going to be going with Denver. I know that Denver has been a rough team over the last few seasons, and they bring in a completely new coach in Tim Burgstaller. Hopefully I said that correct. But he was a winner at the Division II level, and we've seen these teams that have hired on Division II winners have immediate success. I think that the style that Burgstaller had over at Minnesota State Moorhead is going to really translate into this conference. His team last year shot 37.7% from 3. He brings with him Carson Johnson, who at the Division II ranks had 19.8 points, 3 assists per game on 42% 3-point shooting. Logan Kinsey, 14.5 points, 5.5 boards, 37.5% 3-point shooter. They bring in Ian Moda, who was over with the Bracket Bus and Bucknell Bison last year. Small sample size of 7 games, but 10 points on 43% 3-point shooting. Julius Rollins is going to be able to provide some rough and tumble at 6'7", 9.5 points, 4.5 boards at Western Illinois last season. And they do bring back a guy from last season in Josh Lee. He's one of the main holdovers from Denver, and he averaged about 6.5 points, was able to shoot it well from 3. And you've got a lot of guys coming in from Pima Community College into this conference. You'll find out about another one a bit later, but Gabe Oldham, he was at 6'8", able to give that team right around 9.5 rebounds per game, a little bit over a block per contest, should be able to provide them with some rough and tumble down low. For Denver, they're not going to be able to compete towards the top of the conference, but I do think that there's some upside here with them, and I've got them at number 6 in terms of my projector or finish. And number 5, I'm actually going to go with North Dakota State, simply because they were number 1 in the nation in terms of 3-point shooting percentage last year at 39.8%. That actually shot up to 41.9% when they were away from home, but they still had their struggles on defense. They were 363rd 3rd out of 364 Division I teams in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis, and even with that 3-point shooting, they were still 4th in the conference. Now, they do get back to Mari Wheeler-Thomas. He missed all of last season due to injury. 2 years ago, 10.5 points, 2.5 assists, 37% 3-point shooting. He was going to be able to help sort of replace a lot of that production that is missing from a season ago. And then Noah Feddersen, he's able to give you about 8.5 points, 6 rebounds on 38% 3-point shooting at 6'10". That's great versatility, but the guys that they brought in via the transfer portal aren't necessarily guys that you'd expect. They bring in Max Marley. I believe that is of relation to Dan Marley, and he comes in from Pima Community College. 14 points, 3.5 boards, 3 assists, shot 38% from 3, and did begin his career at the Division I ranks over at Central Michigan. Emil Skita, he was able to, over at Sacramento State, have some versatility. 8 points, 3.5 boards, 3.5 assists, but shot less than 30% from 3. And then Markai Strickland, he was solid over at Western Michigan as a starter, but I just don't know if he fits his system. 11.5 points, 4 boards, shot just 25% from 3-point range. Does add in there a little bit of ability to be able to generate turnovers, so that should be able to help out North Dakota State, but I think that they're going to need to turn over a little bit of a new leaf, just not as much outside shooting as they had last season. I think that that's going to hurt them a bit. So I do have this North Dakota State team at number 5 in terms of my projector finish. At number 4, I go with South Dakota, the Coyotes, as they were 3rd in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Rock solid on offense, 63rd in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Now, obviously, well outside the top 275 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but they bring back the Bruns burner, Isaac Bruns, 14.5 points, 4 boards for a team that was number 1 in the country in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis. Now, they're going to have some mixing and matching to do at the point guard spot, but Josiah Dotzler, he's going to be bringing in some depth after he spent a little bit of time at Creighton. Ethan Kaiser, he's coming in after he made some starts 2 seasons ago over at South Alabama, so they've done a nice job hitting the portal, really unlike a lot of teams in this conference. Jordan Crawford comes over from Eastern Kentucky, 7.5 points, a steal and a half per contest, and should be able to elevate this team in terms of their defense. And Cameron Fens coming back after he had 8.5 points, 5 boards, and a block per contest as a true 7-footer. You just don't find that in this conference very often. This is a conference where you don't have a lot of guys that are able to get their nose dirty, be able to do a good job of being able to hit the glass, and they are going to be missing some of their main pieces from a season ago in terms of backcourt, the likes of Chase Forte and company, but it's not like these guys were necessarily amazing 3-point shooters. This is a team that is very much built around not turning the ball over, getting down low, doing a good job on the glass, a lot of offensive rebounds without Fens. That should be able to correct itself, and this was one of the best teams at getting to the free throw line in all of college basketball. I think that they're going to be able to stay true to that identity, and I think that they're going to take a stride forward. So I do have the Coyotes of South Dakota at number 4 in terms of my projector finish. At number 3, I'm going to be going South Dakota State. For South Dakota State, they actually do a really good job of retaining a lot of guys from a season ago. You lose Eric Henderson as your coach, but Brian Peterson, great name. He is staying with the program. He goes from the assistant coaching spot to the head coaching spot, and he brings back 3 of the top 4 scorers from a season ago. Joe Saylor was able to give you 12.5 points per contest, 11.5 points per contest from Kellen Gary, who was able to add in their 2.5 assists per game. Matthew Morris, 8.5 points per contest as well. And when this team is really humming, typically they're one of the better 3-point shooting teams in all of college basketball. All 3 of these guys were solid, not necessarily amazing. I'll shot between 33.5% and 35.5% from 3-point range. This has been a team that has been looking a little bit more to the glass, and losing Oscar Clough, no doubt about it, that is a big giant loss for this team. And they really didn't go out in the transfer portal to try to replace him, but you've got Damon Wilkerson, who came off the bench. He was able to average about 5 points per contest. Jane Jackson, he's able to give you about 6 points per contest as well. This team was 2nd in the country in terms of defensive rebound percentage, as opponents only grabbed 20.2% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound. I think that they're going to stay true to their style because they stayed in-house. They're not going to be making any wholesale changes or anything like that. And Nate Barnard, he's a true 7-footer for the South Dakota State team that just really didn't see a lot of playing time last season. He's dealt with a little bit of injury, just hasn't necessarily been fully utilized with this program. I think that he's an upside guy. Is he going to be what Oscar Clough was? Heck no, and he's got a little bit of a different skill set in general, a guy that's able to bomb it from 3-point range, but I do think that after he only averaged like 1.5 points per contest last year, 2 years ago, he was able to see a little bit more playing time and average yard near a block per game. I think that he's going to be able to take some strides forward and keep the South Dakota State team relatively towards the top of the conference. I've got them at number 3 in terms of my projector finish. At number 2, I do have to go with Omaha here. With Omaha, they do retain 5 out of their top 7 scores from a season ago, but you do lose your top 2 guys from a year ago. Now, I really like what Cameron Thomas is able to bring to the table. He had 6'8", was able to shoot about 36.5% from 3, 6.5 points, nearly 4 boards per contest, and this is an Omaha team that just did an exceptional job in terms of being able to hit the glass last season as well. When you take a look at this Omaha team, They allowed opponents to only grab 22.6% of their missed shots as an offensive rebound, 8th in terms of defensive rebound percentage in the country. Julian Margrave, he comes on over from South Alabama. He played just one game last season. 2 years ago was a 42.5% three-point shooter. He's going to add some pop from the outside. Tony Osborne is back. He shot 39% for 3, 12 points per contest. And for Omaha, you'll notice that their three-point shooting just really elevated when they were in conference play last year. Not conference play, it was a little bit ho-hum, hit or miss, but when they got into conference play, this team was shooting about 40.2% from three-point range. Just absolutely exceptional there. They were not allowing teams to be able to grab offensive rebounds as well. Lance Waddles, he actually began the season a little bit more in a main facilitator role. He played a little bit more off the ball in the back half of the season. He was able to add in 9 points per contest. You bring back Deshaun Glover, who's able to give you 7.5 points per game. Rock solid backcourt. Do have a little bit of question mark down low with losing Markel Sutton. That was your top rebounder from the season ago. Nobody else grabbed more than 4 rebounds per game for this team, so I do have to put them at number 2 in terms of my projector finish as a result. And number 1, I've got the Tommies of St. Thomas. Now, I recognize it was St. Thomas. They're a team that was well outside the top 200 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but how about a top 15 team with regards to their three-point shooting percentage? How about a team that has done just such an exceptional job of being able to take care of the ball? Top 15 team in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis. They bring back Noah Mansale along with Carter Bajurke, hopefully I said that correct, about 10 points per contest, shot 42% from 3. Mansale really didn't shoot it well from 3, but he's able to give you a block, a steal, 2 assists, 11 points per contest. He's just a conduit to winning in general. Ryan Default, he's back from a season ago after he was able to shoot about 43% from 3 on a very, very small sample size. He took like 10 threes all season long, but he's able to give you 5.5 points. I think that he might be able to expand his game here in this season as well. And for St. Thomas, this is just such a good team in terms of not beating themselves, being able to take care of the ball, make sure that every possession counts. And they've got Ben Osterban, who's back as well. With Osterban, he's been a guy that has been able to rise with regards to this conference. 5 points per contest, 3 boards. He was able to shoot 46.5% from three-point range last season, and I think that he's a guy that is going to be able to elevate his game as well. Not a team that necessarily does a ton in the transfer portal, but keep in mind, Austin Hero, that is the brother of Tyler Hero. He's going to be coming in as well, and I do think that there's a little bit of upside with him. If you're expecting him to be Mr. Tyler Hero 2.0, I think that you're bucking up the wrong tree there, but you know what? A guy that grew up in the great state of Wisconsin, out there in the Midwest, I think that he's going to be able to give this team a little bit more pop as well, and I do think that St. Thomas, in their first year of NCAA eligibility, they take advantage of it. I think that they're going to be very motivated to be able to make the NCAA tournament this year, and I do think that they get the job done. St. Thomas is my number 1 team in my projector finish for the Summit League, and that will wrap things up for the Summit League Conference Preview Edition right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of 2 ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated, and then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And big thanks once again to Rob Donaldson, who does great work with the show/podcast Rob's Best Bets. He joined me in the second segment, and I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. So I'll be back with you guys once again tomorrow. And again, be on the lookout for more conference previews. That's my Conference Preview Edition. Hopefully up tomorrow, if not within the next 48 to 72 hours. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.